Raymond, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's good to be here.
Glad to have you. Had a great conversation a few weeks back on site with Dory and you and Chris Ridson, and have you on to go a little deeper into some of those discussions.
Awesome. I'd love to expound on any of the details and features that you're interested in.
Excellent. I want to start. Let's start, Raymond, with you giving us an overview of Steritec, some of the services. I know, in addition to sterilization, you have lab services and consulting. Why don't we, before we get into some of the deeper technical discussions, just give us an overview.
Right. So obviously, we're in the business of ETO sterilization. We've got 5 vessels, 2 8 pallets, a 6 pallet, 16 and a 10. We also have a 2 pallet steam vessel. Mainly, we use it for R&D for customers exploring that modality. Predominantly, our lab services are exclusive for our customers, and that kind of exists within that framework. I'm not in the business of being a public lab, though we may have handful of customers that don't sterilize. They just don't have a sterile product. They want us for other testing. So that's kind of fits that landscape a little bit. And I would say our main differentiator is we have the ability to troubleshoot problems and fix things that require a lot of expertise, a lot of experience mainly, and a deep understanding of the sterilization process and meeting those challenges.
Okay, excellent. When I was chatting with Dory and Chris, Dory talked about the bottleneck in the validation of sterilization services, and it's a big issue right now. I just kind of wanted you to kind of expound a little bit more on that challenge, and before we get into some of the discussions about AI.
So when you've got a mature OEM or CDMO, they've generally got their plan. They got their stuff together. They've got seasoned quality people that understand the needs. They've got the requisite, dunnage. They've got their business together, right? And where it becomes challenging is mainly for the new guys that have a product, they want to get it to market, and they're strapped for cash, generally. So they want this perfect storm of quality, quick, and cheap, right? And we all know that old joke. So
Yep.
I think the difficulty is in there's not a simplified checklist that they can say, okay, we have to have these things ready to go into sterilization validation. And one of the good things is what I'm seeing is that new manufacturers are actually starting to consider sterilization before they start developing their packaging, before they start choosing their materials. So there seems to be the light went on somewhere in the industry, and somebody said, hey, you should really include sterilization. So a lot of those delays can be shortcutted by saying, hey, look, we've got this pallet design. We want to sterilize this. And I say, whoa, your densities are way too high. You need to consider, not trying to pack so many products onto one pallet. You need to consider some alternative configurations, chimneys, things like that will allow you to get gas to those critical areas and get it back out. And sometimes we've been able to steer them around material selection. Say, hey, this material loves EO. It loves to soak it up and it loves to keep it. And your residuals are going to be high. So there's a lot of lessons learned that we can convey to the customer and save them some time and effort. So, but all in all, it's around the preparedness of the customer on meeting that validation requirement, because they want it fast, and fast is achievable if you don't have challenges in terms of product densities and material requirements and things like that. So I think just, some kind of, not necessarily a definitive checklist for what you need, but a checklist that is informative to say, contact your sterilizer, work with their consulting group, get all of these things teed up. So when you are ready for a validation, you're set up for success and expediency.
You said something pretty interesting, design, getting ahead of that. And, we have this term, design for manufacturability.
Yep.
I did a podcast with Sarah Patash of Canyon Labs, and we talked about design for packaging, right? And then I did, you could talk about design for automation. Now we're talking about design for DFS, designed for sterilization, right?
Yep.
Getting
It's
ahead of that.
it's multivariable, and the issue is you're solving one problem over here and you're causing another problem over there. So understanding how that's tangled up, and understanding the tensions between those cardinal poles, so to speak, and kind of finding a good mix. A lot of the times the sterilization SME doesn't have the packaging expertise, but you put them with the packaging SME, and they can generally come up something that fits the customer's requirements a lot quicker, a lot faster.
Okay. Wanted to get into when we were on site, you threw out a bunch of real interesting concepts about the use of AI in medical device and sterilization. We'll get to the sterilization part before, but you mentioned some of the more challenging use of AI in implantable medical devices, the risk and regulatory. I wanted you to talk a little bit about that. It was fascinating.
So if you're an avid AI user like myself, and I encourage everyone to optimize their workflow with AI tools and vibe coded tools as much as you can, as so long as you're within the bounds of your quality system, right? Don't go out in left field too far, but there are ways to enjoy a lot of repetitive work that does require a human in the loop, something that requires post review to make sure it's right. But the AI can generally do the lift and documentation creation and things of that nature. They can generally do 99% of the lift, and then you review it for validity. Now, you don't want to turn it loose to where there is no human in the loop, because we all know about LLM hallucinations where they just make facts up. That's generally a concern for taking the human out. So human in the loop, and like I say, we at Steritec, we use AI a lot to streamline workflows. I use it a lot for validation work when I'm looking at a product and looking at a configuration. I've built some really nice tools for thermal modeling, and kind of looking at a material composition of a load and determining a heat transfer coefficient so that we optimize the front end of a process, so that we're maximizing benefit of the chamber and minimizing total chamber time, total product on the floor time, and getting to those multivariable goals like we were talking about. You've got this tension between all these goals. You've got the material requirements. We can't be hotter than this temperature. We can't have this much humidity. And you've got the sterilization requirements of, well, we've got to activate the organisms. We've got to kill the organisms. We've got to leave the most minimal amount of residuals. So when you have multivariable equations like that, and you've got a pretty good framework as a sterilization consultant or SME to kind of understand what those inputs look like and what the output should look like. And when you can turn that into a deterministic equation, it can expedite determining how long is it going to take to get this validation done. I can tell you that there's a lot of work in the industry is where they do these process definitions, and they do an inordinate amount of sublethal cycles, right? So customer pays through the nose doing sublethal cycles, trying to figure out what's the optimal gas time to get fraction negative results so they can plot their curves. And really, that's really a thermal equation more so than it is one of organism activation. It's an equation of, do you have the right temperatures in the geometric center of your load? Do you have the right humidities? And using some of these tools, by having the information of their load, we can kind of plot where we need to start. So we minimize the iterative front end of the process and kind of immediately get to something that is meaningful in terms of calculating, what the SAL and the D value needs, and what our expected SLR is going to be for their process. So able to kind of save the customer some money, and furthermore save time.
Yeah.
And that's very effective tools that I've been able to build based off of a lot of the sciences that we implement. And what you kind of see in some of the more traditional sterilization roles is they've got a whole host of spreadsheets. They've got 20 spreadsheets. Each one of them is a different tool, and they go to that spreadsheet, they plug in all this data, and then they have a cumulative understanding internally, but they don't have a way of expressing that as a a totalistic formula, like an E equals MC square aha moment. Here's the magic for sterilization. So kind of what I did was I took that 20 spreadsheets and composed it into a tool. And it's very, very helpful. Saves a lot of time and kind of gives me an idea of, beforehand of where we're going to be. Now you'd mentioned implantables.
Yeah.
So part of my work history was embedded software development. Now, what is the difference between embedded software development and standard software development? Is think about your microwave.
Yeah.
You set a time, runs a timer, ding, it's done, and there's embedded software in that microwave, especially on the ones that you connect to with a Bluetooth device. You people have a washer and dryers. You can build your own custom wash cycle, those kinds of things, and that's all fun. The long-term administration and management of implanted medical devices requires the same kind of external connection. You have to have a tool to program the pacemaker, to look at diagnostics on the pacemaker, your insulin injector, your neurotransmitter. And kind of what has happened in the landscape of AI is you look at Anthropic and you look at the Claude model. Opus predominantly is kind of the thing that 4.7 right now is the latest release. It's what everybody uses. But they have another model, and it's called Mythos. And Mythos was so good at finding software vulnerabilities, they decided not to release it to the general public. It could go through legacy, through operating systems, and it could find vulnerabilities that have been there for, like in Windows, for instance, 20, 30 years. These vulnerabilities have existed. So when you see, Firefox, the browser, normally every release, they get about 20 to 30 security patches, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, after they got the Mythos model, 1 month they released it 423 security patches. And that's just a browser. So you've got the ability to take software and look at it, and it can be compiled code. It really doesn't matter. The Mythos understands it fundamentally. You don't have to have expressive variable names. It naturally understands. It swims in those waters. Large language models, in part, were trained on open source software. If you go look at a GitHub repository, they can train on any of that that's publicly available. So it intrinsically understands how software works. And now, with some of the adjustments they've made in understanding protocols, understanding, frequency domains, a lot of the security that the implantable industry has relied on is security by obscurity, meaning that only their internal experts know how the recipe is made. How do they access? What RF frequency do they interface with your pacemaker on? How do they program it? Well, Mythos is smart enough that if you hook it up to the right external machinery, it can actually crack that, and within hours. And furthermore, it can understand the total framework of how that device is programmed. Now, you want to increase the fear factor on that is, as long as you can, if you had one in your hand, you could interact with it directly, and you'd fundamentally have the total framework and layout of how to program that pacemaker or shut it off. Think of it as a kill switch. And that is the scariest thing. And I will tell you that Mythos model that they released to, tech giants, has made it out into the open. So that model was released, general, not intentionally, hackers got to it, but now anybody who wants to look at this landscape and say, what are vulnerabilities? Well, if you've got implantables and you're vulnerable. And that's a scary thing. It used to be that you would think that, take your garage door, for instance, you think, well, that's a rotating RSA encryption frequency. My garage door is, tied to my clicker in my car. I'm good. And you can train it. Now they can just brute force it from your driveway.
Wow. That's shocking.
A lot of people have demonstrated. You can go search YouTube and find people demonstrating hacking garage doors with just some basic items you can get that plug into your laptop off of Amazon. So security by obscurity is dead. because you say, well, a human define this protocol that we interact with this device, and they don't have that specification. But the interesting thing about communication protocols is a human designed it, but it only does a certain number of things. That's it. I mean, you got to handshake with it. You've got to pass your authentication. You've got to interact with the data set. And most of that information is carried with the data itself. And those are very easy things for an LLM to understand and restructure. Good example is there is a very, very large company that does defense work for the government, and they had an application that was written probably circa 1993, and they had the compiled code, but they didn't have the source code.
Mm-hmm.
So they had this one executable that they kept copying and reusing over and over and over in their embedded devices, but they had no longer had the source code. They were actually able to take that compiled code and reverse engineer the source code from it. And that is, normally would take an engineer with a lot of subject matter knowledge years to do that. And they were able to do it inside of a day. The Claude Opus 4.6 built a C compiler in 2 weeks that worked. And that is an incredible lift. So if you understand, if the implications of what I'm saying is that people that make implantables that have, effects to the patient are at risk, and they need to be assessing these risks. It is the landscape has changed, and that's really, we can move on to some of the other topics, but this one is this one has some frightening implications.
Yeah, that's amazing and scary at the same time. Yeah. How, we talk about implantables in medical devices and the use of AI and in a regulated environment, right? How do you, what can you not regulate?
So the land, it's like chasing the wind. The landscape is changing because the capability of the models is changing, and you've got rates of change. You've got a linear rate of change. You've got exponential. You've got geometric, and you've got combinatorial. And we're somewhere in the exponential area in terms. Now, there's a lot of the tech, technovangelists that are saying that we're about to hit the part of the curve where things slow down. And my statement is that though in linear computing, and that's like a computer like you and I use, that may be the case. But when you consider the quantum computing piece of it, no, that's just starting. The capabilities, of amassed arrays of qubits, they've learned recently that the more qubits they get in a quantum computer, the more stable it behaves. So if you combine that with some of the things that they've learned in linear computing with LLMs, the sky's the limit. And that may be exactly how they achieve artificial general intelligence, which, AGI, I'm sure you've heard that term bandied about. But I can easily see that being the next stage. So how do you regulate that? You really can't. You can set a framework up, but any framework that you put together is going to be so nebulous as to be ineffective. It's going to have to be very general because you're trying to encompass all of the changes that may happen within that architecture. And so meaningfully, what do you do? It can't be people that just understand microbiology or chemistry. You're going to have to involve people that have cross-disciplinary understanding. Subject matter experts in the AI field may need to be brought in and then indoctrinated into kind of what the medical device field, how it operates, so they can make judgments saying, here's where you set the end caps for what you can and cannot do. In terms of manufacturing, expediting manufacturing, engineering assisted AI, I don't think you should restrain any of that because ultimately you got a human in the loop. It's when you've got device monitoring and you've got device access. That's where the guardrails need to be put on it, because ultimately what you're going to hear, in my estimation, is, well, we only read data from the device. We only read data from the device. But the only way you can read data is if you poll the device or you request it, but there has to be a two-way conversation. And I can tell you that, 20 years in engineering, every engineer leaves themselves a way to access that device. They don't ever lock themselves out of it.
Right.
They had a large OEM that made, let's say it was pacemakers, had to release a firmware update for their pacemakers. And one of the concerns is that if they didn't write the firmware right, it was going to brick the pacemaker. And some of these things needed the update. So they had to bring the patient in and, potentially put them in some kind of cardiac event. And that's real scary stuff. But think through the process. They brought the patient in. Some device was in the room talking to the device in their body and changing the software remotely. You see?
Yeah.
So that's the reality is how do you protect yourself from that? I mean, humans, we can't walk around with a USB connection implanted in our body, but so they're going to tell you that wireless connectivity is the right way to go, but it's painfully open.
Yeah.
And the obscurity piece no longer matters. Security by obscurity is gone. You can brute force it now in hours.
Amazing. Interesting what you said too about the regulatory and the growth of AI exponential. And we all know the regulatory environment is not capable of that type of response.
Right.
It's a huge gap, like you mentioned.
Yeah, because people are gonna utilize it because it saves time, and in a lot of cases, you get a better outcome. So you're not going to stop them from utilizing it, but what you can do is regulate the places where it touches the product and touches the patient. And I think that's the trick, is defining the scope that it's acceptable and the scopes where it's not.
Yeah.
And I think that, it just monitors, or it's a great tool for looking at patient data and coming to conclusions. But when you have it touch the device, you open yourself up to a model in a nefarious person's hands that can also touch the device, but it can also change the device or change the nature of how the device functions. Like a good example, and this is old, but as a documentary on Netflix, you can go see. It's I think it's called 0 Day.
Okay.
And there was a Iranian nuclear facility where they were refining, I think it was uranium. That's what they were refining. And it was air gapped. Now, air gapping is where they have no connection to the outside internet. The only connection they have is in terms of their facility power. So no network connectivity. And the, agencies figured out a way to get this virus into an air gap facility. So what they did is one of the contractors that worked in that facility was at a coffee shop, and he used his laptop, and they were actually able to install, by being in proximity to his laptop, they were able to install this software that got onto that air gapped network. Now, what the virus did is the virus caused the spinning of their centrifuges to be misshown on the screen. So they were having centrifuges like bust up left and right, and apparently that component of the refinement process is one of the more expensive pieces of the process. So they were just bankrupting them by destroying their centrifuges. And the other interesting aspect of that virus is it went global. It didn't do anything to anybody's computer, but it was installed and people had it, and it was just kind of waiting. And one of the guys from a large antivirus company was interviewed on the documentary. He says, we could see this installed on all these machines, and had all of these 0 day exploits on it, meaning that certain time frames that it could be activated, globally. Right. And it was a massive program. It was the work of multiple developers working for a long period of time. And the guy was saying, he says, well, there's not one single hacker that's going to build this. He says, this is a intelligence agency that built this. So that's a bit of information for you. So now, looking at the landscape 10 years later, you've got AI that can build entire applications in hours.
Right. From a team of, with some agency, so to speak.
With a plan and expertise, goes from years to hours.
Yeah. Yeah. Years and years to hours.
Yeah.
Wow. No, I wanted to ask you, before we go down, we talked about implants, the risks there, but for everyday minimally invasive catheter systems that are sterilized and the use of AI in that process, is that?
So are we talking about the design of it, of the sterilization of it, the testing of it? Like what component of that end to end, from raw materials to patient are we talking about?
I'm talking about sterilization process.
So, well, the process control of a sterilizer is done on what's called a PLC.
Mm-hmm.
That's a programmable logic controller, and it is there is no benefit to having AI involved in that.
Okay.
Because if you think about it in terms of expediency, looking at the safety vector, right? PLCs operate on generally a periodic scan class, and that means that they're scanning through all the inputs and outputs on a very fast scale. In some cases microseconds, especially for motion control. And LLMs operate on a way different time horizon. They operate on 20 seconds. So when you're looking at a safety event, you want that traditional logic operating at 100 millisecond intervals, not I've got to send a API request to OpenAI and wait for the model to analyze it. Or even if you're locally hosting a model, you're still looking at a time horizon of seconds rather than microseconds to milliseconds. And it, to me, doesn't have a place in process control.
Okay.
Engineering assistance, absolutely, because you have a human in the loop that's kind of interpreting the validity of the data.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. I wanted to just touch on one other thing, kind of throw, maybe this might be a curveball, but you talked about how the efficiencies with AI, and I was wondering, in sterilization and processes, is there also an associated like process capability, like PPK, that can be garnered, or efficiencies in that process that you could see?
Give me a use case.
For a particular process that utilizes AI or some of these more advanced techniques to streamline or make it more efficient or optimized. You talked about the loads. Is there a way to kind of measure that?
100%.
Okay. From a process capability and like a PPK, CPK.
So if you want to look at it from a metrics perspective,
Yeah.
Look at it in terms of what is your, conception on a validation.
Yeah.
If it takes you 18 months and you've implemented these tools and now it takes you 6 months, that's a pretty easy metric.
Yeah. Right.
I can tell you that what I really like it for is I don't know if you've ever read a validation protocol or a validation report, but a lot of what you get, generally speaking, in the industry is they have a template that they've used a lot of times, and they go change the names to protect the innocent, and they change a few sentences in it, but you have all of this cruft that's not always accurate. One of the things that really gets me is X amount of samples. Okay, so you'll have the number, then you'll have the word. Well, everybody changes the number, but they don't always read it and change the word. Mm-hmm. So that's something that I love about AI is I can feed them that report or that protocol and say, find all the internal inconsistencies. And it gives me a punch list of things that aren't correct. Now, I've turned out a more efficient, professional product and saved confusion. So imagine that nobody else really reads it. Imagine they don't catch that mistake, but now you've got somebody downstream operationally trying to execute, and then suddenly, am I putting 20 samples in the load, or am I putting 18? Because the word is 18 and the number is 20. So, that's how things slow down. It's when you have a confusing narrative, internally inconsistent, uh, you know, set of executions or set of values that are meaningful regulatorily in a report, or from a, PQ standpoint or MPQ standpoint. You've got to have all of that right. And also cuts down on regurgitation. There's nothing I despise more than something that is said 3 different times in 3 different parts of the document.
Yeah.
So optimizing for cognitive load, is also another great tool for it.
That's a good example. Okay. Raymond, thanks so much. This has been
Yeah.
fascinating. I really appreciate your time.